spoons. These were made by my husband, Jean-Baptiste Soulard, right here in Port-Royal, many, many years ago. When I was a girl, my only silver was that of the Acadian moon hanging over the river near my home. You know what I'm saying, hein? Vous savez? Maybe not. We weren't poor, my family and me, though I was one of 19 children. 19! And true, we had no real silver, but we had a good home and food off our land. We were Acadians. Vous savez, Acadian. And by the time I was born in 1694, well, the Acadians had lived in this area for 50 years. My family lived not far from here, in Préron, what you call Round Hill. As with all Acadians in those times, we lived along the French River, of course, huh? And we diked the marshlands so we could farm the rich soil. Oh, it was a life filled with rhythm. The rhythm of the seasons and of the land. And we were nearly self-sufficient, though we did trade our produce or cattle for things we could not make ourselves. Huh? Glass, iron things, du sucre, vous savez, sugar, and so forth. Oh, these items, they came from New England. It would seem that this was an idyllic existence. Oh, wait. And it could have been, if not for the constant warring between the English and the French. But you know, both countries thought they wanted this land known as Acadie. Oh, ils vouliez, ouais. Ils vouliez. They wanted it. Until they got it. And then they forgot about it. C'est ça que Papa disait. It's what my father would say. We tried not to take sides. This became increasingly difficult, as you can imagine. How well I can remember the attacks made by the English on the fort here at Port-Royal. No, I was not here, but I was just up the river, only a few miles away. Savions tout ce qui se passait, and we all knew what was happening. When I was 8, I remember many big ships. They come from Massachusetts, and the commander on board, well, he demanded the surrender of the fort. Then, in 1707, the fort and the town suffered through 2 attacks from New England. We, the Acadians, well, we were called upon to supply provisions to the garrison. We always had to supply our crops to the garrison, whether the English were attacking or not. I can still smell the stench. La boucan. You know, the smoke from the fires. So much of the town was burned. The worst attack. 1710. Hey, premier, but first, I must tell you something good, huh? Something happy that happened the year before. That is when I met my, future husband. I met him at the marché. You know, the market in Port-Royal? Some of us had come in early on the tide in the morning. Oh, well, you see the river. She was our highway. And I saw this newcomer. I learned that his name was Jean-Baptiste Soulard. He was a gunsmith and a silversmith working for the garrison. He had just moved down from Canada, Quebec, where his father too was a well-respected silversmith. Jean-Baptiste and I, on s'en marié. We married on February 10th, 1710. We built this house here on Rue Dauphin in the spring of that year, and we moved right in. We were so very happy. Oh, il faisait beau. For so short a time. I was en famille, expecting our first child. when the English attacked the fort yet again. There were British warships and colonial transport boats, you know, and 2,000 English soldiers. While the French, they were heavily outnumbered and the siege lasted only a short time. Gouverneur Subercas surrendered. What followed was not a happy time for us. Premier, one thing, we moved out of our petit chenou, out of our cozy home. Never again did we live where we had been so happy together. And then the next year, my father, he was arrested by the English. After the birth of our second son, Pascal, we sold our house. And we moved to Quebec to be near Jean-Baptiste's family. Oh, we sold the house to Monsieur John Adams. I was never happy in Quebec. And I died there. Only a few years later, in 1717. Jean-Baptiste silver spoons. Well, they remind me of when I was happiest in my life. Well, that's why you find me here, in my petit chenou, huh? In my little home, on Rue Dauphin.
Oh, aye. Good day to you. You regard here before you, in his own home in Annapolis Royal, ancient capital of the English province of Nova Scotia, one William Skene, Esquire, surgeon of the garrison and of the 40th Regiment, mind, and member of the governing council and so forth. We're speaking now, of course, of some 300 years ago. As I came here lived here from 1711 until 1757. But I was not born here. No, I was born in Scotland, as you may ken. Aberdeen, as a matter of fact. You know, I've always thought it to be of particular note that I spent so much of my life here in New Scotland. Like, did you know that? Nova Scotia is Latin for New Scotland. Many people lose sight of that. King James I of England, but also King of the Scots, agreed with Willie Alexander, that would be Sir William, that if there was to be a new Spain, a new England, a new France, and so forth, then the right of the matter would see a new Scotland raised as well. And so it happened, about a century before my time. This land around here is Scottish through and through. Give no credence to those English or French who might claim otherwise. Do you ken, as many times as I've visited here, I'm still a bit disoriented, I must admit. Oh, I know this is my home, but things are somewhat askew. I'm facing south when I should be facing north. Now, I do know why this is, of course. When I lived here, my house, where we sit now, was situated over yonder. It was that Sinclair fellow who moved my house, this was long after my time, and adjoined it to a house that in my day was owned by a number of people. But my house remained my house. Well, mine and Anne's. For you must understand, I married Anne Adams. She was the daughter of a local entrepreneur, as I called him, John Adams. He was a New England businessman and a member of the governing council also. Very important man in the early years of the British regime. But as I was saying, regarding my house, our house, it was built by one Jacques David de Pontiff. He was the surgeon of the garrison under the French. At one time, as I understand it, he had had 3 buildings on this property over yonder, including a hospital and a billiard hall. Very civilized people, the French. But all were burned in the English attacks of 1707. So when I took over from him in 1711, this building where we are now, was a newer house, one that he had built to replace the one that was destroyed. In my role as a member of the governing council, we had many dealings with the Acadians, as you might imagine. We had to assert British authority over the Acadian people, and our orders were to obtain from them an oath of allegiance to the British Crown. Not an easy task, I can tell you. We did think that we had some success in this. By about 1730, we were able to send to London some 200 names, Acadian men who had signed the oath. But we had to grant them an exemption from bearing arms against the French or the Indian people. That was the only way they'd sign. But what were we to do? To force them to do anything else? There were so many Acadians and so few of us. At any rate, those in London never accepted the validity of these oaths. Now, I'll leave it to others to tell you the ins and outs of this Acadian story as it developed. I had no problems with the Acadians myself, personally, and I was sorry to witness their expulsion from these parts in 1755. Well, I remember the local deportation from Goat Island, down the river a piece, towards the end of that year. But by this time, I was no longer in a position of authority to do anything about it one way or the other. The governing council by this time was well established in the new capital. And by the way, my income dwindled considerably when the capital changed location. I was still officer of the port and justice of the peace, but those positions brought in little enough. The lack of funds was one of the reasons why Anne and I removed to Boston in 1757. Well, that's enough then. Good day to you now.
Is it a wrap?
Welcome, my good people. My name is Rebecca Whitchurch, and this is my establishment, though I never did get round to putting up my board. But here is my license from the governing council. Funny the things you drag around with you for 250 years. But look, isn't it lovely? November 1746, be it hereby known that Rebecca Whitchurch is hereby licensed to retail strong drink on her conforming to the rules prescribed to her, etc., etc. You know, I'd never done this before, run a tavern, though some of the other officers' wives were not so inexperienced in the trade. 4 others were all granted a license at the same time as me. Oh, yes, to run a public house was a time-honored way by which soldiers' wives, and here's the point of the matter, by which woefully underpaid soldiers and their wives could earn some extra money. I guess I wasn't in the trade long enough to be worn down by the coarseness of it all and the overindulgence. Oh, no. I was always proud to think that you would find ours to be the finest purveyor of strong drink in this, our fair city. Well, truth be told, our city wasn't really a city at all, and it certainly wasn't very fair. Not with all those Frenchies laying siege all the time. But Annapolis Royal was the capital of Nova Scotia. And James, my James was a lovely man and a good soldier of the crown. He was a Royal Artilleryman, a matros up at the fort, you know. How many people have said to me and asked me about that title, matros? And many's the way that said I'd be much better served by a good mattress. But no, I wouldn't trade my James for anything. No, a matros was very important. He assisted the gunner in loading and firing and sponging the big guns. A very important position, I'm sure you'll agree. But alas, not well paid. This house you call the Sinclair Inn, me and my James bought this place in the spring of 1747. Before here, we had owned another house in town, but it was pulled down during the French and the Indian raids, so it wouldn't fall into the hands of the enemy, you understand. What I remember most about that time, when the French were on the verge of attacking, was our governor. Mascarene was his name. Well, he revoked all our drink licenses to keep his men fit for battle. Some would say it would have taken much more than that. We had a good cash-only business here. We never granted credit, and we never accepted goods in payment. Oh, no. We served the staples of the day. We had brandy and wine and rum. Well, that's all you'd need. Most would be more than satisfied with a good jar of rum. But you know, in spite of the stability of the trade, the uncertainty of the times here in Annapolis Royal made my James and me very anxious to move on, which is what we did a very short time after this old inn became our concern. Now, nobody knows where we went, and I'm afraid I'm not about to tell you my little secret. Rebecca Whitchurch. Here's to good King George, my dears.
Oh, yeah. So I am the famous Sinclair of the Sinclair Inn. I worked and lived in this building, and I hope you will not be too much disturbed if I tell you that I also died in this building. Oh yeah, but let me tell you about other things first. So first I must tell you, my name was not always Sinclair. No, I was from Hanover, northern part of what you call now Germany in Europe, and there my name was Ziegler. After to Nova Scotia, I moved, my name changed little by little, first to Sinclair with a Z, and then finally to Sinclair with capital S. This made me more, I think, of the new land. Meine Frau und ich, my wife and I, Maria, had already been in this place, this area, maybe 20 years before we bought the inn. That was in 1781, and it was not yet an inn. To leave it good to know, we had first lived in Granville, you know, over the Annapolis River there, from the 1760s. We had done very well for ourselves, but we wished to be part of the life of this time of Annapolis Royal. So here we moved and rented the building you know now as the Adam Ritchie House, just 2 doors down. That building suited us very well. There we made a tavern and an inn. Oh, but then the building was sold to Mr. Ritchie, and we had to move. So for 30 guineas, we bought the old French building. 30 guineas. That tells you how very bad it was. The Adam Ritchie house sold for 200 guineas, yeah. And this also, we knew this small house, the French one, is too small to suit our purposes. So we moved another building from over there and making everything together. So we make new upper stories of both buildings after they come together, and it is much better now. We make all new 21 sash windows, and for, how you say, we make 4 fan light windows. You know the ones I mean. So when everything we finish, we have the best in town, maybe in the township. Oh my God. Here today it is so quiet. Not so when we first opened our doors for business. For you understand, it was the time of the big American War. The war for the independence of all those colonies. Well, so to Annapolis come so many loyalists. I remember to this day, I would meet with Mr. Bailey, the Reverend Jacob Bailey. Yeah, he too had come as a refugee. What a fine man, Reverend Bailey. Together we spoke many, many times about the town. In October of 1782, for example, the year we opened for business, You will remember so many loyalists. Reverend Bailey says 500 loyalists, Master Sinclair, arrived by ship right out here in the river. 500. And perhaps there had been a little over 100 population to begin with. Each little space is filled with peoples. The Sinclair Inn has no more room. There's less room when the next year in 83, more than 2,000 others arrived. Mr. Bailey was so distressed by all he saw, his church was full to bursting with these poor people. Yeah, it's true to say, not all these loyalists did for all time stay in our little town. Most moved elsewhere, out of town, I mean, and things for the first time became normal at the Sinclair Inn. We had a good business, never any problems. You know, though somehow, as time went by, I felt very alone here in Annapolis Royal. I missed my old home. I mean, far away back over the sea. So in 1799, I planned to go back. But before this happens, I make a journey of another type, the one you all must take. So now, you will excuse me. Reverend Bailey awaits me. As always, we have much to discuss. Auf Wiedersehen.
Oh, do come in. I was just taking care of some business. I'm Mary Sinclair, the wife of Frederick Sinclair. Perhaps you remember him better as the Colonel, for that's what most of his friends called him. The Colonel and I ran the Sinclair Inn until he passed away in 1799. And after that, I was sole proprietor of the inn. For quite some time, we had a thriving business, but we weren't always in the innkeeping trade. We first lived in Granville, owned 500 acres there, land that we bought from Elias Davis, for 2 cows, if you can imagine. My husband was a very good businessman, let me assure you. And he bought quite a bit more land, both in Granville and in Annapolis. And he often provided mortgages to borrowers. Believe me, the Colonel was a well-respected gentleman of this area. But he is most remembered, I do suppose, though, as an innkeeper of this Sinclair Inn. But the dear man, if you listen to him, you'll never get the full story. So let me give you some particulars. How well I remember, for example, what luck we had in late 1781 by the fact that we had not yet opened the inn for business. We were busy readying things, moving together the 2 smaller buildings that make up the whole, when the town was overrun by American privateers. I can assure you the town was ransacked from Hog Island to the Cape. And 2 of the town's most prominent citizens, Thomas Williams and John Ritchie, were taken captive. Well, had our inn been open for business at the time, there's no telling how great a loss we would have endured. Early the following spring, another privateer sloop arrived here in the river, but fortunately it was captured by a British man-of-war before too much damage was done. Again, our inn was spared any harm. How busy we were when the Loyalists arrived. Thousands of them were here in town, I can assure you. At times it seemed like there were thousands right here under this roof. Every available room in town was stacked with Loyalists, and that's the truth. But even after things calmed down and all was more regular-like, we still had some exciting times here. For at least 2 years until the courthouse was built, the inn's large room below stairs, as the good Colonel put it, was well used in holding sessions of the Supreme and Inferior Courts. And as well, how many times I cannot tell you, the walls of these here premises shook with the call of the auctioneer. By order of the High Sheriff of Annapolis County himself, the Sinclair Inn was used for property auctions. Yes, sir, right here under this very roof, I can assure you. And as well, truth be told, these old walls rang with a different form of exclamation along about this time, but this emanating from the mouth of the good colonel himself. It came about when he learned that he was to be subject to the Capitation Tax Act of 1791. Well, the province was only trying to rid itself of its debts, and the colonel was assessed for only £2. Well, you would have thought he was being asked to give up Jane. Ah, yes, Jane. The good colonel always knew a good bargain when he saw it. I can remember how well pleased I was. I think in the winter of 1787, when the colonel bought our slave girl to work here at the inn. As I recall, he paid a gentleman of New York some £21 for Jane. A very good investment indeed. And so you see, there's so much to remember. When the colonel passed on, I ran the inn until my demise in 1814. And in my will, I left the inn to our daughter Hannah, if she does not go back to her husband, Peter Balser. But that is another story, I can assure you.
What was it now? What was it? Oh, yes. Haul a bag. Haul a bag. That's what I used to shout. Oh my, I'd almost forgotten, and how could I? 1,000 times by 1,000 times I must have called that out. Haul a bag. Haul a bag. Yes, that's what it was. Folks would look sharp then. Everybody knew me. Why, there's Rose, the baggage smasher. I don't know nothing about smashing bags. I was always right particular when it came to transporting goods. But that's what the judge called me, baggage smasher. Well, smasher or not, I do know I hauled more than a few bags in my time. That's how I made my way in this world, hauling folks' baggage for cash money. They come in on the St. John ferry and I'd cart their goods. Trunks, hat boxes, kegs, bird cages, you name it, to wherever they were fixing to stay in town, like here in the inn maybe. Haul a bag. My, how I remembers this building. And I remember the Sinclair people. You all call it the Sinclair Inn. They was operating here when my folks and me arrived in this bitty town. Now we'd come, that is, me and my family and a lot of other folks, loyalists they called us, from a place called Philadelphia. You ever hear of it? Anyway, that was in 1783, and I was, I don't know, maybe 10 years old. But let me tell you something first thing. When you look at Rose Fortune, that's me, you are in no way looking at a slave. Oh, dearie, no. I set up on my own. I kept myself. Well, the big war in America settled things out proper. My kin didn't want no truck with rebels. And, well, behind it was we all left those big United States of America and come here where good King George promised to look after us. But that's another story. So yes, I remember this building, this here Sinclair Inn. Not 'cause I ever lodged here, that wouldn't have happened, loyalists or no. No, I lived up the street, just a piece. The house I lived in is long gone now. But you know, right along where the Royal Bank is today. No, I never stayed here as such, nor I own did I ever have a proper paid for meal here. What are you staring at? My clothes?
I bet you think I wasn't overly particular about the way I dressed. Well, you'd be wrong there. Why, just take a look at my portrait. Oh, yes, my portrait. I bet you didn't know that my portrait was done up by an artist and all, did you? Why, for a time, they even put it up there in Fort Anne Museum. On display, if you please. Oh, yes, indeed. Shows me up good, it does. And here, I'm dressed just as I am now. White cap with a string tied beneath my chin, a man's hat on top, man's hat, mind, to go with a man's coat and high-leg boots. Didn't I wheel my luggage barrow as good as any man? Well, that's why I wore men's clothes. Oh, yes, I remembers lots of different things about the old days. Like I told you, that judge called me baggage smasher. Well, that was Judge Halliburton, big-time writer and all that. Before he moved on, he lived with his young family in a house just up the street a ways. But later on, that's when I'm talking about, when he came back to town on business, he'd always seek me out to do his hauling. That's when he called me the Smasher. You know what else he called me? He called me his Black Venus. Black Venus. My, he was a funny man. You know, somebody once showed me a picture of a regular Venus in a printed up book. That woman didn't have no arms. What did the judge mean by calling me a Venus? I had arms all right. He was a funny man, that judge. But he tipped me a shilling. Nothing funny in that. You know, I never thought much about it, but I kind of started something with this business of mine, this hauling of luggage and stuff. My family, the family that came from me, they worked the same trade. And my family always lived right here, not in Lakeal, not in Granville or on the Bay Shore where black families first lived in the 1780s, but right here in the thick of things. Anyway, my great-grandson James and his son Jimmy just continued on the trade. Jimmy Jr. and his wife Pearl got involved in everything going on in town. They was well-respected folks. I'm telling you that the whole town of Annapolis Royal shut down completely for Jimmy's funeral. That was in the 1960s, about 100 years after I crossed the mighty river. But you know, the best thing ever is that my own true kin, that sweet child, Doreen Lewis, do you know she was elected mayor of this here Annapolis Royal? Canada's first black lady mayor. Can you imagine that? Mayor Doreen Lewis. So you see, I have every right to be proud. I done all right. My descendants done better than all right.
Okay. I sit here, but I don't like it. Look over there. What have you crazy people done to my house? Oh, sure, this was the hotel. But my house, my beautiful house, was just there. There, you see? No, you no see because there's nothing to see. But a place to park your buggies. Oh, okay. I calm myself down a bit. What do you want to know anyway? Oh, yes, sure. The hotel. Well, sure, I bought this place. My name is Gavazza, Antonio Gavazza. Not your typical Annapolis Royal name, eh? You look up in the telephone book today and you don't find many Gavazzas, I'm gonna bet you. No, sir. Well, that's because I come from a long way away. I was born in 1774 in Italia. Well, it wasn't even Italia then. I lived in a small state in a small town called Shava. How did I get so far from my home? Well, that's a long story. Too long. Let's just say that particular circumstances brought me to the Annapolis Valley in this Nova Scotia. Oh, early in the 1800s. I was known as a trader. You know, a businessman. I buy this, I sell that, I make money to live. Well, one thing I do is I buy this place called the Sinclair Inn. It had been a hotel for many years. This place here, that was in 1818, and I pay 350 English pounds. That's not a little money, you know. Oh, but yes, 1818. That was a big year for me because I get married too. Oh, yes, and she become Mrs. Antonio Gavazza. She was a starlet from Paradise, oh, maybe 20 miles from here. You know, up the valley. She was a little younger than me. Well, she was 18, but that's not so young. I was 44. Not so young either, but not so old. We did okay. We had 4 children. We make money from the inn, and then in a few years we have enough to build our own house. Right next door there. There, where you have beautiful empty place for buggies. That was in 1825, and let me tell you, it was a very nice building. We live there, and I have my hardware and grocery business too. We were very busy with these new things, so we no run the inn no more. We lease it out. Things go by pretty good until we have that big high mighty, that Thomas Judge Ritzy. He called us into court. He claimed we owe him money. I guess he's the one they believe because we lost the hotel. You know, there's a saying here. Annapolis belongs to the church, the devil, and Judge Ritchie. I can tell you that's the truth. But Thomas, my son, who was in St. John, he'd buy back the building when it come up for auction. So the Cavazas control the building till Thomas get rid of it, without no help, in 1858. Judge Thomas Ritchie. Pooey. Well, anyway, lots of things happened around here back when I first buy this hotel. New roads and bridges being built everywhere. St. Luke's Church, you know, the nice Anglican church, that was open for service. My 4 children were all baptized there. Oh, yes. The army was still here then, up at the fort. The government house where the fort commander lived, that was a mighty nice building too. The building burned down, I remember, about 1833, I think. Mostly, though, I remember interesting people, like Judge Halliburton. I remember him, and I remember Major Norman's wife. Like me, she was from Europe, but she come from Spain. I have a lot of fun watching her. Gregoria Ramona Antonio, she called herself. She always say that she was a special friend to the mighty Duke of Wellington back when he was fighting in Spain. Major Norman was there too. That's how they get married and then come here to the fort at Annapolis. Anyway, Mrs. Norman, she always talking about her dear Duke. But I don't think Major Norman was so dear to her. Oh, no. I can still hear her right out in the street. She say, "You Normina, you brute beast, you breaking my heart. But what worsen, you breaking my crockeryware." Oh, yes, it's very, very funny. You see this vase? Very beautiful now. This belonged to my son, long after I was gone. Yes, everything the best and the biggest. You need proof of that? You remember I tell you about St. Luke's Anglican Church. Well, you go take a look at the graveyard there. It's just across the street from St. Luke's. They say there are hundreds and hundreds of people buried there. And there are maybe a couple hundred gravestones to see. Some go all the way back to 1720. Well, you go look. You just stand back and let your eye pick out the biggest gravestone there. Who do you think that belongs to? I'll tell you. The Gavaza family. We may not be in the phone book. Maybe somebody else owns the inn now. Maybe they tear down my beautiful house. But I make sure we be remembered here in Little Annapolis Royal, a long way from my home.
How well I remember the winter of 1878. There came a glorious day in February of that year. I have the notice right here to show you. Well, first off, though, my name is Mary Anderson, and my family, my husband William and myself, good-looking man, you see, to begin with, operated this place as a hotel for upwards of 30 years. But I would have to say that the happiest day in all that time was when our establishment took the pledge, so to speak. Now, this notice here appeared in the February the 9th edition, 1878, as I told you, of the Annapolis Journal newspaper. Please allow me to read this to you. I still get a lot of pleasure out of reading it. Temperance House. The subscriber begs leave to inform his friends and the travelling public generally that he has opened his house on temperance principles, and thanking them for their liberal patronage in the past, hopes that they will continue to give him the same patronage in the future. good accommodation for permanent and transient boarders, good stabling and attentive ostler, terms moderate. Temperance house! Oh, that had been a dream of mine, ever since Mr. Edward Mott, proprietor of the Temperance Hotel of this town, lent me a book on the history of the Massachusetts Temperance Society. And when I thought of the debauchery and the lives brought to ruin by the intemperate use of strong spirits, I speak of alcohol, rum, brandy, wine, evil spirits all, and the most crushing aspect of all, that strong spirits were in the same manner, a routine manner, sold here in this very building. Well, I must say I raged at the thought. But no more. From that glorious February of 1878, the Anderson establishment was dry, and praise God for that. My husband William and I first opened this building as our hotel, Anderson's house it was then, in 1865. There was much excitement in the province in the 1860s, first with the debate and then with the joining together of the provinces to form the nation of Canada. And so many of us felt that all things were possible for this new country. Well, yes, there were many who railed against the Union and saw nothing but disaster ahead, including the wondrous Mr. Joseph Howe, but no complaints from those here in this small town, especially with the word that the train service was from Halifax was to be pushed through to Annapolis Royal. Yes, came from the east, right out onto the wharf, and then if you wanted to travel west to Digby or to St. John in New Brunswick or down to the Boston States, well, you had to take a boat from here. There was a regular service to all those places. I remember a number of buildings had to be removed from the area just south of St. George Street, directly across from the wharf. And today you have your parking lot of the farmers' market located about in that area of which I speak. So there was much preparation and much work to be had for willing men here, even before the arrival of the train. So it was the time, too, of much shipping from here in town. Lumber would move out to the West Indies with sugar, molasses, spices, and even rum, and so forth, coming back. Apples were transported to England, too. That was a big trade. And there was the business of building the wooden-masted sailing vessels and business of keeping them into repair, and there were several shipyards here and on the Granville side. A very busy time for our little community. Speaking of shipping reminds me of something else I saw in my lifetime, and that was the time the river out here froze right up. Froze solid, right straight across the river from here to the Granville shore. Now that's salt water with big tides twice every day, not easily frozen. It might happen once in every 100 years. And when it happened in my lifetime, it was more than extraordinary because the river remained frozen not just a day or two, but for 5 weeks. 5 weeks. What a novelty, you can imagine. I remember someone, can't recall just who now, went out onto the ice with his photographic equipment and took photographs of the Annapolis side and the Granville side. His photo of this side showed the Temperance House very nicely. Anyway, I made sure Eben, my son, got a copy of that photo for us. I had it around here for a long time. But what reminded me of that? Oh, yes, foreign trade. There was a big English ship that got itself locked into the ice. And I remember that it was first of all unloaded of its products and then loaded up by men with horse-drawn sleighs and ox carts. Coal was unloaded and then apples went aboard. 8,000 barrels, I recall. A wondrous time, you'll agree. My husband, William, a good-looking man again, yes, was incapacitated in 1875, and thereafter my son, Eben, and I ran the hotel. And then, of course, Eben on his own. Eben couldn't finally keep up with the mortgage on the place, and he lost control of it in 1896. Oh, so many years, and so many things I could tell you. This was the busiest of times in our little town. Even King George, Queen Victoria's grandson, and the future king himself, visited here in the 80s. Now that tells you something. But we'll have to save some for another time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I just must go and look for that photograph.
Hello, my name is Bill Edwards. Big Bill, many people called me. That's because I was 6'4" tall and weighed 260 pounds. I ran this place as the Farmer's Hotel from 1910 to 1922. And let me tell you a little something right off the top. The old hotel here had seen better days. The Andersons and the Riordans, who owned it after Eben Anderson lost it, they were competing with fancier places outside the downtown area. Your good clientele wanted to stay up along Upper St. George Street, if you please. Oh, there were still hotels operating right around here. That was part of the problem. There were too many hotels. Now, we all made a buck, but everything, not just hotels, mind you, but everything started to look a little shabby. I guess when the golden age of sail sailed away, and after we had those bad fires in town, and two, now that I think of it, when the rail line was pushed through to Digby in 1891, well, everything changed. People rode right through the ancient capital here, so all those things taken together, well, it just became harder for the town to bounce back. The old money wasn't here, and new money wasn't coming in. But anyway, don't get me wrong. For all that, there were still some good times. As I say, most of us were still making a living and enjoying life. I know I was. I wasn't born here. I was born in Windsor, Nova Scotia. My family moved here in 1882. My dad was a sailmaker. One of my brothers stayed here, but I moved on. I spent a long time in the railway business. Oh, for close to 20 years, I guess. So you see, I'd seen a few things. After my son died, I retired from the rails and came back here to Annapolis. I bought a livery stable, but sold it. Then, in 1910, I bought this here building, which I named the Farmer's Hotel. But as I say, times weren't the best, and you had to do what you had to do to get along. We took anybody in that needed a bed, and for however long they needed it. I hauled gravel, kept the pound, and kept my eye open for any opportunities to make a few extra dollars. I suspected that the horseless carriage was something that would be around for a while, so I put a gasoline pump out front here. Then came the fires I mentioned. The first one in 1920, down by the old post office. Gutted that building. That whole section where King's Theatre is today, gone. Oh, that was bad, but the next fire was worse. The following year, in 21, every building from St. Luke's Church right down to the Royal Bank corner, all gone. It had been a dry summer, and the water supply for town was shut off for repairs when the fire started. 21 buildings in all were destroyed. But you know, for all that, there was fun to life back then. I enjoyed having fun. That's why I owned Jack, my monkey. Everyone loved Jack, and his actions were often written up in the town paper. Why, Jack's even in this picture that I have here. Mind you, the focus of this picture is on Pat, my well-known friend of the equine persuasion. My horse, that is. We used Pat to pick up luggage from the railway station. Maybe you can't see, but if you look close, why, there's Jack perched on the hood of the car. We had this picture made up as a postcard and calendars. Good advertising it was. That monkey was a character. And he was quite political, too. He knew his politics. Why, he would tear up the Grit Morning Chronicle wherever we left it lying around, but handle the Tory Herald with the greatest of care. Oh, yes. I can't tell you what a sad day it was when Jack left us. I'll never forgive myself. It was October 1915, and Jack and I had had a grand time at the Yarmouth exhibition. But just as we were heading home, Jack fell off the car, and I drove over him before I realized it. The only thing which eased my grief was that I was able to have Jack stuffed and set up in the front window of the hotel, sort of like he was still with me. His likeness is there to this day. I also used my front windows to display whatever people brought me. Unusual vegetables, for example. I like to give people something to talk about. I even used the side of the Farmer's Hotel for a blackboard we called morning's milk. Old L. Edward Neville, or yours truly, would chalk up some tidbit of interest or a little poetry, or what have you. We wanted to give people a lift, to lighten their day, to get them thinking. I didn't last long after I sold the Old Farmers Hotel to Jim Wallace. Within a year I was gone. That was 1923. Here's my obituary. You know, though, I must have done something right. Here's a bit of what they put into the Spectator about me. His fearless independence of speech and action often led him into disagreements in public and private, but he was very fond of sport with an inexhaustible fund of humor. A man of big heart and kindly deeds in many quiet ways. There you have it. No one could ask for more. I'm proud of that. Now, if you excuse me, Jack is expecting me out front.
Well, I don't know. I guess I was what you'd call today a bit of an entrepreneur, or however you'd say that. Whenever I'd think about it, which I didn't often do, I consider myself a businessman. With varied interests, you might say. This old hotel was only one of my concerns. Anyway, my name is Stuart Mills. I was born in Granville in 1890. Earlier on, before I moved to Annapolis, I used to do a mail drive from here to Victoria Beach. Now, I always had an eye for a business opportunity, and pretty soon I started selling and buying pulp and firewood. And I did some hauling. Well, I had to get a move on. You see, I got married when I was 21, and me and my wife Jean started in on a family right away. Somewhere in there, I got interested in motor cars. And I angled around for the Ford dealership because I knew it was coming up. And I got that in 1931. We called the business Mills Motors, and it was a success right from the beginning. Well, as much of a success as you could hope for. You see, it was the height of the Depression. And that's why we had to have our fingers into other things. And that's why we bought the Farmers Hotel. Farmers Hotel. I have no idea what Bill Edwards was thinking when he called it that. I certainly didn't know of any farmers lay out hard-earned cash to stay in a hotel room. So first thing, Jean and I changed the name to the Annapolis Royal Hotel. Now, I left much of the day-to-day management up to Jean, so you'd have to talk to her about that. See, I was into other things. I do know that our place wasn't as swanky as those places up the street. No, sir, we provided reasonable accommodations to the guys coming in on the pulp boats or young fellas from out of town. What they needed was a reasonable price for a room, and that's what we gave them. We also had some hockey teams staying here from time to time. Why, we had the Maple Leafs, the team from Middleton. They stayed here back in '36. Now, even before we bought the place, I used to use the livery stable here for car repairs. Yeah, we had lots of rooms here. You know, the third floor was expanded in 1920s, and we had a big dining room. Jean took care of all of that. See, I had too much other stuff on the go. Well, I still had my mail route, and I was doing trucking, and I started a taxi business, and eventually I laid on a bus run from Annapolis to Victoria Beach. Along the same lines, I started Wagner Tours. We'd run passengers from here out to Digby and back. Yeah, it's true, I was a busy man. One of my more interesting sidelines was keeping stock of liquor up at the service station. Yeah, you heard me right. Liquor, for sale, mind you. Now, there was no licensed premise in town. There was no pub. So I used to keep the stuff up there just on an as-required basis. Now, this was a kind of an open arrangement. Everybody knew about it, but nobody ever interfered with that aspect of my business. And I never touched the stuff. and we never sold it at the hotel. People still talk about me today, nearly 60 years after my death. They'd say how I pull out a big wad of bills and I just peel some off and I conclude a business deal right there on the spot. Yeah, lots of times there was no book work required. And I was a generous man in my own right. Why, there are those here amongst you today that'll still talk about how I'd get one of my employees to deliver wood to a client. And I'd say, Ralph, when you land that wood there, if they can pay it, fine and good. And if not, just leave it. Times were tough and not everybody was as lucky as I was. I guess folks thought pretty good of me though. My funeral in 1946 at the Stony Beach Church was the biggest that they ever had in that community. I hope they rented one of my buses for the occasion. Well, I better get going. I can't make any money standing here.